Stay silent. Nobody asked for your opinion. The sentence landed harder than the crystal glasses resting beneath the chandeliers. For a moment, even the soft piano music drifting through the ballroom seemed to lose its place. Conversations stalled. Smiles faded. A dozen executives glanced up from their tables. Every eye in the room found the same person. Naomi Brooks stood beside a table dressed in black and gold linen, one hand holding a silver water pitcher, the other resting calmly against her apron. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. Across from her stood Ethan Crawford, billionaire CEO of Crawford Dynamics, a man whose name appeared on magazine covers almost as often as stock market headlines. At 39, Ethan had built one of the most influential artificial intelligence companies in America. Investors admired him. Competitors feared him. Employees rarely challenged him. Tonight, he wore a tailored navy suit that fit like armor and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. And tonight's room mattered more than most. The Grand Regent Hotel in downtown Chicago had hosted senators, celebrities, and international leaders, but even its staff understood this evening was different. Behind the closed doors of the Aurora Ballroom, a deal worth nearly $3 billion was approaching its final signature. Investors had flown in from New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, and London. Cameras waited outside. Financial reporters refreshed their phones every few minutes. Entire markets were expected to react by morning. Success tonight would push Crawford Dynamics into another stratosphere. Failure would become front-page news. Naomi knew all of that. Not because anyone had told her. Because she listened. For the past 4 hours, she had moved quietly through the ballroom, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and disappearing into the background exactly the way guests expected service staff to do. Invisible. Useful. Forgotten. It was a role she understood well. Most people never noticed the waitress carrying the tray. They noticed titles, corner offices, expensive watches, last names attached to skyscrapers. They noticed power. They rarely noticed people. Naomi had learned that lesson years ago. Yet there was something unusual about the way she watched the room tonight. While executives focused on contracts, she noticed expressions. While lawyers reviewed numbers, she noticed hesitation. While investors celebrated prematurely, she noticed details others ignored. And one detail in particular refused to leave her mind. It had started 20 minutes earlier. A presentation flashed across the massive screen at the front of the ballroom. Charts, forecasts, growth projections, the kind of numbers that made headlines. Most guests applauded. Some took photos. Others nodded as if they fully understood every graph. Naomi happened to be pouring sparkling water near the projector when she saw it. A discrepancy. Small. Almost invisible. Just a few figures buried inside a larger forecast. Most people would never have caught it. But Naomi did. She paused. Looked again. Then again. The numbers didn't match. Something was wrong. At first she assumed it was a formatting issue. Then she noticed another inconsistency. And another. Her stomach tightened. The room continued celebrating. Nobody else seemed concerned. Nobody else appeared to notice. Naomi tried to tell herself she was mistaken. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. Then she made the mistake that led to this moment. As Ethan walked past her table surrounded by investors, she quietly spoke. "Excuse me, sir. There may be something you should look at before." Ethan stopped, turned, and looked directly at her. Not with curiosity, not with gratitude, with annoyance. The room instantly sensed the shift. Powerful people often changed the temperature of a room without raising their voices. Ethan was one of them. "Stay silent," he said sharply. "Nobody asked for your opinion." A few uncomfortable laughs escaped nearby tables. Others lowered their eyes. Nobody wanted to become part of the moment. Naomi felt dozens of strangers watching her, waiting for a reaction, waiting for embarrassment, waiting for something. But she simply nodded once. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. Ethan dismissed her with a glance and continued walking toward the center of the ballroom, where the final presentations were about to begin. The conversation around the room slowly restarted. Glasses clinked. Music returned. Investors smiled again. To everyone else, the moment was over. But not to Naomi. She watched Ethan cross the room beneath the golden lights. She watched executives gather around him. She watched lawyers organize folders near the signing table. And then she noticed something else. At the far end of the ballroom, Seated quietly among the international guests, an elderly Japanese investor had witnessed the entire exchange. Unlike everyone else, he hadn't looked away. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't returned to his conversation. He simply watched Naomi with a thoughtful expression, as though he recognized something the rest of the room had missed. Naomi lowered her eyes and continued serving guests. Yet somewhere deep inside, a feeling she couldn't explain began to grow. Because the mistake on that screen hadn't disappeared. The numbers were still wrong. The deal was still moving forward. And before the night was over, silence was going to become the most expensive sound in the room. The Aurora Ballroom glittered like a monument to success. 40 floors above downtown Chicago, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline in silver and gold. Headlights crawled across distant streets like rivers of light. Inside, everything was designed to impress. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light across polished marble floors. Servers moved quietly between tables carrying trays that cost more than some people earned in a week. Every detail whispered the same message. Power lived here. Money belonged here. Influence decided what happened next. At the center of it all stood Ethan Crawford. A cluster of investors surrounded him as though gravity itself pulled people into his orbit. He smiled for photographs, shook hands, and exchanged confident remarks about innovation, growth, and the future. The room responded exactly as it always did. With admiration. Ethan had spent 15 years building Crawford Dynamics from a small software startup into one of the most valuable artificial intelligence firms in America. Financial magazines called him visionary. Business channels called him unstoppable. Young entrepreneurs quoted his interviews. University students studied his rise. Tonight was supposed to become another milestone in an already legendary career. Yet while guests celebrated, a faint tension lingered beneath the surface. The final agreements had not been signed. Not yet. Across the ballroom, Naomi Brooks continued working as though nothing had happened. She refilled glasses, cleared empty plates, offered polite smiles when guests acknowledged her. Most did not. Years of service work had taught her how to disappear into a room without truly leaving it. But beneath her calm expression, her thoughts refused to settle. The numbers she had seen during the presentation kept replaying in her mind. Forecast projections, revenue assumptions, international licensing figures. Something did not fit. The more she reviewed them mentally, the less sense they made. Naomi was not the kind of person who ignored details. She never had been. Long before she wore a black apron and comfortable work shoes, she had spent her days surrounded by textbooks, research papers, and computer screens. Back then, professors described her as exceptional. One mentor even predicted she would become one of the leading minds in machine learning. But life rarely asks permission before changing direction. When her mother became seriously ill several years earlier, Naomi made a choice. Scholarships disappeared. Research opportunities faded. Dreams were placed on hold. Hospital visits replaced lectures. Bills replaced ambition. Responsibilities replaced recognition. She never complained about it. Some sacrifices are made quietly. Some victories never receive applause. Tonight, however, none of the wealthy guests surrounding her knew any of that. To them, she was simply another waitress carrying water pitchers between tables. Invisible. Replaceable. Easy to dismiss. Near the front of the ballroom, a giant screen displayed the final schedule for the evening. 20 minutes until signing. 15 until investor remarks. 10 until international approval. Excitement grew with every passing minute. A television crew outside the ballroom prepared for live coverage. Market analysts waited for confirmation. Entire companies were watching from thousands of miles away. Then Naomi noticed something unusual. Standing near the presentation equipment was Victor Langley, Crawford Dynamics' chief financial officer. He appeared calm at first glance. Professional. Polished. Yet something about his behavior felt different. Twice she saw him glance toward the control station. 3 times he checked his phone in less than a minute. When another executive approached him, his smile appeared forced. Brief. Tight. Naomi could not explain why, but her instincts immediately sharpened. Victor was not celebrating like everyone else. He was worried. Across the room, Ethan remained unaware. He laughed with investors while discussing expansion into Asia. Applause followed one of his remarks. Cameras flashed again. Success seemed inevitable. Meanwhile, The elderly Japanese investor Naomi had noticed earlier remained seated quietly near the back of the ballroom. Unlike everyone else, he spent very little time watching Ethan. Instead, his attention drifted repeatedly toward Naomi. Once their eyes met for only a second, he offered the smallest nod before returning to his conversation. It was not enough to understand his intentions, but it was enough to make Naomi curious. The atmosphere continued building toward the anticipated signing. Glasses rose. Smiles widened. Confidence filled the room. Yet beneath the polished speeches and expensive suits, something invisible was beginning to move. Naomi could feel it, like distant thunder before a storm, like a single crack hidden beneath perfect glass. Everyone believed they were witnessing the beginning of a historic business victory. Almost nobody realized they were standing at the edge of a very different story. 10 minutes remained before the signing ceremony. The countdown displayed in the corner of the presentation screen seemed harmless enough, yet every minute that disappeared tightened the knot in Naomi Brooks's stomach. She moved between tables carrying fresh glasses and linen napkins, but her attention never strayed far from the people gathering near the center of the ballroom. The closer the evening moved toward its grand finale, the more certain she became that something was wrong. It was not merely the numbers she had seen earlier. It was the behavior surrounding them. Successful business deals usually generated confidence. Tonight, beneath the smiles and handshakes, she sensed something else. Nervousness, concealment, calculation. Victor Langley stood near the audiovisual station again. His movements remained controlled, but his eyes told a different story. Every few minutes he checked the room as though making sure something remained exactly where it belonged. Naomi watched him exchange a brief glance with a man she did not recognize. The interaction lasted less than 2 seconds. Most people would have missed it entirely. Naomi did not. Years of balancing work, responsibilities, and difficult circumstances had taught her to notice details others overlooked. Sometimes details mattered more than words. Across the ballroom, laughter erupted around Ethan Crawford. Investors crowded near him while photographers captured another round of images. He looked exactly like the man featured on magazine covers. Confident, relaxed, certain of victory. Watching him now, nobody would have guessed he was standing only a few feet from a problem he could not yet see. Naomi wished she could stop thinking about it. Life had taught her the cost of speaking when nobody wanted to listen. She understood her place in rooms like this. People accepted service when it came from a waitress. They rarely accepted warnings, especially from one. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. As she approached the service station near the ballroom entrance, a quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "You noticed it too, did you not?" Naomi turned. The elderly Japanese investor stood beside her. Up close, he appeared older than she had first assumed, perhaps in his late 70s. His silver hair was neatly combed. His posture remained straight despite his age. Most striking of all were his eyes. Calm, observant, patient. The eyes of someone accustomed to seeing beyond appearances. Naomi hesitated. "I am sorry, sir?" she asked politely. The man smiled faintly. The presentation. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. For a brief moment she considered denying everything. Instead she chose honesty. "I noticed something that did not make sense." The investor nodded slowly as though confirming something he already suspected. "Interesting," he said. Most people here noticed only the applause. Before Naomi could respond, another guest approached him. The conversation ended as quickly as it had begun. Yet his words remained with her long after he walked away. Most people here noticed only the applause. Naomi glanced toward the ballroom floor. He was right. The room had become intoxicated by success before success had actually arrived. That was when she saw it. Near the side corridor leading toward the executive conference suites, Victor Langley slipped a small flash drive into the inside pocket of his jacket. The movement was quick, deliberate, hidden from almost everyone. Naomi happened to be facing exactly the right direction. Her eyes narrowed. A moment later, another executive approached Victor, and the flash drive disappeared from sight. Something inside Naomi shifted. The scattered pieces in her mind were beginning to form a picture. She still did not know what the picture meant. But she knew one thing with certainty. The evening's biggest threat was not sitting outside the ballroom. It was already inside. The countdown clock continued moving. 9 minutes. 8. 7. The room grew louder as anticipation built. Glasses rose for celebratory toasts. Investors congratulated one another before the agreement was finalized. Reporters prepared their headlines. Yet standing near the edge of the ballroom, Naomi felt strangely alone with what she had seen. Invisible, unheard, and increasingly certain that the most important moment of the night had not happened yet. It was still coming. 6 minutes remained. The countdown clock glowed quietly above the ballroom stage while hundreds of millions of dollars in expectations floated through the room like invisible smoke. Guests continued celebrating. Investors exchanged congratulations. Executives rehearsed victory speeches and conversations that sounded casual but carried enormous weight. Yet Naomi Brooks could no longer focus on the rhythm of service. The flash drive she had seen tucked inside Victor Langley's jacket refused to leave her thoughts. She had spent years studying systems, patterns, and human behavior. One lesson had followed her everywhere. People rarely hide things they are proud of. They hide things they do not want examined. Naomi carried a tray of sparkling water toward the executive section and noticed Victor moving again. This time he was heading toward a private hallway reserved for senior leadership. The corridor connected the ballroom to a series of conference suites normally used for negotiations and confidential meetings. Employees were not supposed to enter without permission. Most staff never even approached the area. Victor disappeared through the hallway entrance. Something inside Naomi urged her to keep walking. Another voice warned her to let it go. She was a waitress. The deal was not her responsibility. Neither were the decisions made by executives earning more in a week than she earned in a year. But responsibility and conscience are not always the same thing. Moments later, a supervisor asked Naomi to deliver bottled water to conference room C. The request surprised her. Staff deliveries to the executive corridor were unusual during major events. She accepted the tray and headed toward the hallway. The moment she entered the quieter section of the hotel, the atmosphere changed completely. The noise of celebration faded behind thick walls. Plush carpeting softened every footstep. Framed artwork lined the corridor beneath warm lighting. For the first time all evening, silence surrounded her. As Naomi approached conference room C, she noticed the door to conference room B was slightly open. Only an inch. Barely enough to attract attention. She would have walked past it if not for a familiar voice inside. Victor Langley. Naomi slowed her pace. She was not trying to eavesdrop. Yet a single sentence drifted through the opening. Everything updates once the final file is loaded. Another voice answered, too low to recognize. Naomi stopped. Her pulse quickened. The tray felt heavier in her hands. She remained where she was for only a few seconds. Long enough to hear a chair move. Long enough to realize a laptop screen glowed inside the room. Long enough to notice something sitting on the conference table. A flash drive. The same one she had seen earlier. Naomi immediately continued walking. She delivered the water as instructed and left without drawing attention to herself. Yet the image remained locked in her mind. When she returned toward the ballroom, she glanced back once more. The door to conference room B was now closed. Whatever was happening inside was hidden again. Back inside the ballroom, the energy had intensified. 5 minutes remained. A giant screen displayed the words "Final Approval Ceremony." Cameras had been repositioned. Reporters waited near the stage entrance. Ethan Crawford stood surrounded by board members, while photographers captured images of what everyone assumed would become a historic success story. Watching him from across the room, Naomi felt a strange mixture of frustration and concern. Ethan had dismissed her earlier. Publicly. Coldly. Yet she could not ignore the possibility that he was walking toward a disaster he did not see coming. Near the back of the ballroom, the elderly Japanese investor caught her attention once again. This time he seemed to notice the concern on her face. His expression changed slightly. Curious. Patient. Almost as if he were waiting for something. Naomi looked away. The countdown clock continued its relentless march. For minutes. Around her, applause erupted as another executive took the stage. Nobody noticed the storm gathering beneath the surface of the evening. Nobody except Naomi. And with every passing second, the cost of staying silent seemed to grow larger than the risk of speaking. 3 minutes remained. The countdown clock seemed louder now, even though it made no sound at all. Every second felt visible. Every tick seemed to push the ballroom closer to something nobody expected. Naomi Brooks stood near the service station gripping the edge of a silver tray while a battle unfolded inside her mind. She had seen enough to know that something was wrong. The altered Projections. Victor Langley's strange behavior. The hidden meeting. The flash drive. Separately, each detail might have meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. Across the ballroom, executives gathered near the signing table. Bright lights reflected off polished glass and gold accents. Cameras rolled quietly from designated media positions. Investors adjusted their jackets and straightened their ties. The atmosphere felt less like a business event and more like the final moments before a championship trophy presentation. Everyone expected celebration. Naomi feared they were celebrating too early. She spotted Ethan Crawford speaking with members of the board near the stage entrance. This might be her last chance. If she waited any longer, the contracts would be signed. Decisions would become irreversible. Taking a steady breath, she crossed the ballroom floor. The distance felt longer than it should have. Each step carried the memory of what had happened earlier. The dismissal, the public embarrassment, the reminder that people like her were expected to serve, not speak. Still, she kept walking. Because sometimes doing the right thing is uncomfortable long before it becomes important. She reached the edge of the executive gathering just as Ethan finished a conversation with a major investor. Before he could move away, Naomi spoke carefully. "Mr. Crawford, I need 30 seconds. Ethan turned. Recognition appeared immediately. His expression hardened. Several nearby executives noticed her presence and fell silent. Naomi felt their eyes settle on her. "This is not the time," Ethan replied. "I understand," Naomi said calmly. "But there may be an issue involving the presentation files." Ethan glanced toward the stage, clearly irritated by the interruption. "The files have already been reviewed by legal, finance, and our board." "I know," Naomi answered. "But I think someone may have altered." Ethan raised a hand before she could finish. Not aggressively, not loudly, just firmly enough to stop the conversation. "You think?" he asked. The question drew the attention of several people nearby. "With all due respect, you are making assumptions about things you do not understand." Naomi felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, but she remained composed. "Sir, I am only asking you to take a look before the signing." A few executives exchanged glances. One of them gave a quiet laugh. Another checked his watch. Ethan's patience appeared to disappear completely. "We have spent 18 months preparing this agreement," he said. "Hundreds of experts have worked on it. Auditors reviewed it. Analysts reviewed it. Investors reviewed it. I am not delaying a $3 billion transaction because a waitress believes she noticed something." The words landed softly, but their effect was immediate. Conversations nearby faded. Naomi could feel the room watching again. Ethan stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled. "Your job tonight is to serve guests. Let my team handle the business." The sentence ended the discussion, at least in his mind. Ethan turned and walked toward the signing table without waiting for a response. Around them, people returned to their conversations. The moment dissolved as quickly as it had formed. To everyone else, it was insignificant. Another interruption, another misunderstanding, another reminder of who belonged at the table and who did not. Naomi stood motionless for a moment. Then she quietly stepped away. Across the ballroom, the elderly Japanese investor watched everything. Unlike the others, he did not look amused. He did not look distracted. He looked concerned. Near the stage, Victor Langley adjusted his jacket and briefly touched the pocket where the flash drive had disappeared. The gesture lasted less than a second. Yet when Naomi saw it, a chill moved through her chest. Because for the first time all evening, she realized something even more troubling. The people responsible for preventing a mistake had already stopped listening, and the countdown clock above the stage had just reached 2 minutes. The final minute arrived. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the main presentation screen illuminated the stage in soft blue and silver. Applause rolled through the room while executives took their seats around the signing table. Cameras adjusted focus. Reporters lifted their phones. Every eye moved toward Ethan Crawford. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally come. Ethan stepped to the podium with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for nights like this. His smile was measured, his voice steady. He thanked investors, board members, international partners, and employees. The audience responded exactly as expected. Heads nodded. Glasses lifted. More applause followed. From across the ballroom, Naomi Brooks watched in silence. She no longer expected anyone to listen to her. That opportunity had passed. Now all she could do was watch events unfold and hope she had been wrong. Yet deep down, she knew she was not. Ethan finished his remarks and invited representatives from the International Investment Group to join him on stage. The elderly Japanese investor rose from his chair and walked forward with calm, deliberate steps. The room immediately grew quieter. Even those who did not know his name understood his importance. This was Kenji Takamura, founder of Takamura Global Ventures, one of the most influential investment groups in the world. His signature would unlock billions in funding and international expansion opportunities. The atmosphere became electric. The contracts were placed on the table. Pens were arranged neatly beside them. Cameras flashed continuously. Then something unexpected happened. Before reaching for the documents, Kenji Takamura turned toward the giant presentation screen. "Before we proceed," he said calmly, "I would like clarification regarding one section of the financial forecast." The room paused. It was not unusual for investors to ask questions. Still, the timing felt strange. Ethan smiled confidently. "Of course." Kenji pointed toward a specific chart displayed on the screen. "Could someone explain the projected licensing revenue increase shown here?" A member of the finance team immediately stood. He began explaining the numbers. Confidently at first, then less confidently. Halfway through his answer, he stopped. A slight crease appeared across his forehead. He looked toward another executive. That executive checked a tablet. His expression changed as well. The room remained silent. Ethan's smile faded slightly. "Is there a problem?" he asked. No one answered immediately. The finance executive refreshed the file and checked again. "That cannot be right," he muttered. Nearby board members began comparing copies of the presentation. Conversations that had been confident moments earlier suddenly became cautious whispers. Ethan stepped closer to the screen. His eyes narrowed. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared on his face. Kenji remained perfectly calm. "The numbers do not match the documents my team reviewed last month," he said. "Not even close." The words spread through the ballroom like a cold wind. Reporters lowered their phones and started taking notes instead. Investors exchanged concerned glances. Across the room, Victor Langley's face lost color. He immediately stepped forward. "There must be a technical error," he said quickly. "We can resolve this in a few minutes." But the explanation only deepened the tension. Another executive opened a separate copy of the financial files. The discrepancy remained. Different projections, different assumptions, different numbers. Ethan looked from the screen to his finance team. Nobody seemed to have an answer. The room that had been celebrating moments earlier now felt frozen in place. Naomi watched everything unfold exactly as she had feared. The altered data was no longer hidden. It was visible to everyone. Yet nobody seemed able to explain how it had happened. Kenji Takamura slowly scanned the room. His gaze moved across executives, board members, and analysts. Then it settled on Naomi. Just for a moment. Long enough to make one thing clear. He remembered their earlier conversation. And somehow, he knew she had seen this coming. The silence that followed felt enormous. Not awkward, not uncertain. The kind of silence that appears when an entire room realizes the story they believed may not be the truth at all. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence hanging over the Aurora Ballroom felt heavier than any speech delivered that night. A few minutes earlier, guests had been celebrating a historic partnership. Now executives stared at screens displaying conflicting financial data while investors exchanged uneasy glances. The confidence that had filled the room was gone. In its place stood uncertainty. Ethan Crawford remained near the stage, studying the projections that had suddenly become the center of attention. He looked frustrated, but beneath that frustration something else was beginning to emerge. Doubt. Not in his company. Not yet. But in the certainty he had carried into the room. Around him, finance officers scrambled through files. Legal teams opened laptops. Board members whispered behind raised hands. Nobody seemed able to explain why the numbers had changed. Then Kenji Takamura broke the silence. "Perhaps," he said calmly, "we should ask someone who noticed the problem before any of us did." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Every conversation stopped instantly. Heads turned. Eyes followed his gaze across the ballroom, toward Naomi Brooks. The room froze. Naomi felt hundreds of people looking at her at once. The same people who had ignored her all evening. The same people who had never asked her opinion. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Ethan looked surprised. Kenji continued. Earlier this evening, she attempted to raise a concern. A murmur spread through the crowd. Several executives glanced toward Ethan. Others looked back at Naomi. The room suddenly remembered something many had already forgotten. The waitress who had tried to speak. Ethan's expression tightened. You are saying she knows what happened? Kenji answered with a slight shrug. I am saying she noticed something before your experts did. The statement landed harder than any accusation. Naomi felt her heart beating faster. She had never wanted attention. She certainly had not wanted this. Yet every path leading away from the moment had disappeared. Kenji looked at her patiently. Miss Brooks, he said, would you be willing to share what you observed? For several seconds, Naomi did not move. Then she placed her serving tray on a nearby table and walked forward. The sound of her footsteps seemed unusually loud against the marble floor. One by one, conversations disappeared completely. By the time she reached the stage, the ballroom had become silent enough to hear the faint hum of the projection screens. Naomi faced the display showing the disputed financial projections. Then she looked at Ethan. I may be wrong, she said quietly, but I do not think the problem started tonight. Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. Naomi continued. The revenue projections currently displayed are based on a licensing growth model that does not match the historical assumptions used in previous versions of the forecast. A few finance officers immediately looked up. Others began checking documents. Naomi pointed toward a specific section of the screen. This figure depends on a multiplier that appears nowhere else in the supporting materials. More laptops opened. Fingers moved rapidly across keyboards. The room listened. Really listened. For the first time all evening. Naomi took a breath and continued. When I saw the presentation earlier, I noticed several values that appeared inconsistent. Then I saw activity surrounding files that should not have required last-minute revisions. Victor Langley's face became noticeably tense. Ethan looked toward him briefly before returning his attention to Naomi. How would you even know that? One executive asked. The question hung in the air. Naomi answered honestly. Because before I became a waitress, I studied machine learning and financial modeling. The room went completely still. Not surprised silence. Shocked silence. Naomi continued before anyone could interrupt. I spent years analyzing predictive systems. The discrepancies stood out immediately. Another finance officer suddenly raised his head from a laptop. She is right, he said. The assumptions were modified. The statement triggered immediate reactions across the room. More files were reviewed. More comparisons appeared on screens. Within moments, additional discrepancies surfaced. Every discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. Something had been changed. Something significant. Ethan stared at the data, then at Naomi. The woman he had dismissed twice now stood at the center of the most important conversation in the room. Around them, nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Nobody looked away. They simply listened. Because the voice they had been told to ignore had become the only voice making sense. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Screens glowed. Laptops remained open. Financial analysts compared files while attorneys reviewed timestamps. What had started as a celebration had transformed into an investigation unfolding in real time. Naomi Brooks stood near the stage, no longer hidden behind a serving tray, no longer invisible to the people who had spent the evening overlooking her. Yet she looked exactly the same as before. The same black uniform. The same calm expression. The same quiet dignity. The difference was that now people were paying attention. One of the senior analysts suddenly stood from his chair. We found the source file, he announced. Heads turned instantly. He connected his laptop to the presentation system, and a new document appeared on the giant screen. Rows of timestamps filled the display. Modification records. Revision histories. Digital footprints. The kind of details that rarely mattered until everything depended on them. The analyst pointed toward a series of entries. The financial assumptions were altered approximately 45 minutes before tonight's presentation. A wave of whispers spread through the room. 45 minutes. The timing matched the private meeting Naomi had noticed near the executive conference suites. Another analyst leaned forward. The revisions were not approved through normal review channels. More whispers followed. Board members exchanged concerned looks. Investors stopped pretending everything was fine. The facts were beginning to speak for themselves. Ethan Crawford remained silent. His attention never left the screen. The confidence that had defined him earlier was gone. In its place was focus. Serious, uncomfortable focus. He was finally looking at the problem instead of past it. Then Kenji Takamura slowly rose from his seat. "There is something else this room should know," he said. The ballroom became quiet once again. Kenji looked toward Naomi with a small smile. "Many years ago, I sponsored an international research initiative involving some of the brightest students in artificial intelligence and predictive modeling." Several guests listened politely, unsure where the story was going. Kenji continued. "One participant consistently ranked at the top of every evaluation. Her work was exceptional. Her professors believed she would eventually help shape the future of machine learning." He paused. Then he turned fully toward Naomi. That student was Naomi Brooks. The room froze. Several executives stared openly. Others looked from Kenji to Naomi and back again, as though trying to reconcile two completely different realities. A waitress, a top research scholar. The contrast seemed impossible to them. Yet Kenji's voice carried complete certainty. "I remember her work very well," he said, "because very few people possessed her ability to identify patterns hidden inside complex systems." Ethan blinked slowly. The revelation landed harder than any accusation. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. She had never sought recognition. Kenji continued. "When she disappeared from the program years ago, many of us assumed another company had recruited her." Naomi finally spoke. "My mother became ill." The simple sentence carried more weight than a lengthy explanation ever could. "I needed to be with my family." No dramatic speech followed. None was necessary. The room understood. Some sacrifices do not appear on resumes. Some achievements never receive awards. Across the ballroom, several guests who had ignored Naomi earlier now looked at her with entirely different eyes. Not because she had changed, because their assumptions had. At that moment, another finance officer cleared his throat. "We completed the verification." Every head turned again. The altered projections originated from an unauthorized revision sequence. The officer hesitated before continuing. "The modification trail leads directly to accounts under Victor Langley's supervision." Silence returned. Victor's face tightened. No one rushed to judgment. No one needed to. The evidence was already speaking. Ethan looked at Victor, then at the screen, then, finally at Naomi. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. The room waited. Not for a financial decision. Not for a business announcement. But for something much more personal. Because the woman whose voice had been dismissed only an hour earlier had just saved the most important deal of his career. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The Aurora Ballroom, once filled with applause and confident predictions, now stood suspended in a different kind of moment. Not a business triumph. Not a financial victory. A moment of truth. Ethan Crawford slowly stepped away from the signing table. The cameras that had arrived to capture celebration now captured something far more rare. Humility. He looked around the room. At the investors. The board members. The analysts. Then finally at Naomi Brooks. The woman he had dismissed. The woman he had interrupted. The woman who had tried to warn him long before anyone else understood there was a problem. The silence felt almost sacred. Ethan inhaled slowly. "I owe this room an apology," he said. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was impossible to miss. Every person listened. "Tonight, I believed experience guaranteed wisdom. I believed position guaranteed perspective. And because of that, I ignored someone who saw what I could not." Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Ethan turned fully toward Naomi. "You tried to warn me twice." Naomi remained quiet. "And twice I refused to listen." The words hung in the air. Honest. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Across the ballroom, investors exchanged glances. Some nodded quietly. Others lowered their eyes. Because everyone in the room understood the lesson now. It was not only Ethan who had overlooked her. They all had. Ethan continued. "The truth is, this deal exists tonight because of you." A few moments earlier, that statement would have sounded impossible. Now it felt undeniable. The evidence had been verified. The projections had been corrected. The transaction could proceed safely. What might have become a devastating mistake had been caught in time. And the person responsible had not been a senior executive, a consultant, or a board member. It had been the woman carrying water. Pitchers through the ballroom. Kenji Takamura smiled softly. The expression belonged to someone who had known all along that talent often appears in places the world forgets to look. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Miss Brooks," he said, "would you consider joining Crawford Dynamics?" A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Another executive immediately added, "In a leadership capacity." A third offered, "We would be fortunate to have someone with your skills." Hours earlier, nobody had asked for her opinion. Now some of the most powerful people in the room were asking for her future. Naomi looked at them thoughtfully. Then she glanced around the ballroom. The chandeliers still glowed overhead. The city lights still stretched beyond the windows. Yet the room felt completely different now. Not because she had changed, because people had finally seen her. "I appreciate the offer," she said gently. "More than you know." The room listened carefully. But tonight was never about proving I belonged in this room. She paused. It was about making sure the truth did. The answer settled over the audience like a quiet wave. No dramatic speech. No revenge. No arrogance. Just grace. Ethan lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect far more powerful than any public announcement. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras continued recording. Yet nobody seemed interested in the deal anymore. They were focused on something larger. A lesson. A reminder. A truth people often forget. Titles matter. Wealth matters. Success matters. But none of those things grant a monopoly on wisdom. Sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to the person nobody expected to hear. Minutes later, the corrected agreements were signed. The partnership moved forward. Investors applauded once again. But this applause felt different. Less celebratory. More meaningful. As guests slowly began leaving the ballroom, many stopped to thank Naomi personally. Some shook her hand. Others simply offered a smile. Small gestures. Honest gestures. The kind that cost nothing but mean everything. Later that evening, after the lights dimmed and the crowds disappeared, Naomi quietly returned a stack of unused glasses to the service station. No cameras followed her. No spotlight remained. Yet somehow she stood taller than anyone else in the building. Because she had not changed the room with power. She had changed it with courage. Ethan Crawford had entered the evening believing influence came from being heard. He left understanding something far more important. The strongest voices are not always the loudest. And respect should never depend on a job title. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to speak when everyone else chooses comfort. And sometimes the person the world tells to stay silent becomes the reason everyone else finally listens.